Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third webinar, sponsored by ACTA in collaboration with Cervantes Chat and Friends. Today, we expanded our panel to include Karen Skoric, CPA and president of Canty Associates, and Marco Quintana, who works in commercial banking at Leumi Bank. And of course, we have Bob Prince, attorney at Chat Prince, and Bill Chat, also an attorney. My name's Betsy Guerin. I'm the Vice President of ACTA, and I will be the moderator. So this afternoon, we're going to give each of our panelists a few minutes to do a little presentation for us. And then we will turn over, I'll take control again with the questions. We had some questions taken or sent in previous to the webinar beginning. And then, of course, during the webinar, you can also type in a question if you have one, okay? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, ACTA, and for Bob and Bill for having me. I'm Karen Skoric with Canty Associates. I've been in the industry doing this for almost 27 years. I always say I was started when I was 2 years old. But I'm happy to be here today. Unfortunately, not on these terms of having to deal with difficult subjects, but you know, we have a great collaboration of a group here, and I'm excited to be part of that. So I just wanted to start out a little bit with the financial aspects of it. And we have a saying in our office, what you can measure, you can manage. And that's one of the important things about this time. We really need to make sure we have the financial data, you know, at our fingertips to be able to manage on a day-to-day. And some of that information is you need to know what your cash balances are. You need to know what your receivable balances are. I mean, April 1st was really the first assessment payment that was due. And where are we today? I think, you know, nowadays we're just getting our March financial, but March financial was when times weren't what they are today and changing every day. And one of the things you need is current information. So how do your receivables look today? Making sure you know what your cash balances are. Are your cash balances, you know, going down because you're paying bills and your receivable balances are going up? You know, you really want to keep track of your reserve cash. You know, is your reserve cash going down because you're spending it on operating needs? Are you not funding your reserves? Or, you know, things like that. But you really need to have good reporting at your fingertips, day to day. Like I said, receivable balances, key. You got to keep on top of that, what your cash balances are. And it could be as easy as you're getting these reports and you're keeping just a little dashboard of them. How do my receivables look from every week? How's my cash balances? What's my reserve cash balance look like? And then I think also the other thing you want to look at right now are what projects did you plan on in your budget that are coming up that maybe we need to delay. Maybe we need to consider doing revised budgets for the rest of the year. What kind of costs could we maybe postpone? Maybe you wanted to do mulch and now we're going to postpone mulch. Maybe it's the swimming pool not opening. I mean, there's a lot of tough questions out there that need to be answered and need to be looked at on an ongoing basis right now. See what else. I think I'll leave it at that for right now. I know there's going to be a bunch of questions coming in, but Marco, if you want to take it from there then.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone, for including me in this very important seminar in these times that we're going through. I've been in commercial banking for over 20 years, leading Bank Leumi's commercial and C&I space that includes HOA lending. I wanted to take a little bit of time today to talk about the two lending programs that was passed through the CARES Act. Now, the Paycheck Protection Plan, or program, I should say, may not be as direct as an opportunity here, but let me start by saying one thing, that the funds have run out as of Wednesday, but Congress is working extremely hard to pass an additional funding this weekend. So hopefully we're able to provide more of these loans out to many different clients that need it. But the Paycheck Protection Program is essentially covering not only anyone that you may have on payroll, and I don't want to spend too much time here because, an association may not have a ton of payroll, but let's assume that you have, $10,000 of payroll. The SBA under this program allows you to give you loans up to 2.5 that payroll dollar amount, which would be $25,000 in this case. But you could also use 25% of that loan amount for utilities, for rent payments, or more importantly here would be mortgage and interest payments. And then the second program that I wanted to talk through, it's the Economic Injury and Disaster Program. And that one is a loan up to $2 million that non-for-profits get to benefit at 2.75%. And the loan is set up for 30 years. Associations can apply. They need collateral, but they could use the association fees as collateral for this program as well. The SBA is going to go through their own mechanisms and how they approve these loans based on the association's credit profile. But the number one enhancement that this program has is that when you apply, you automatically can apply for a $10,000 advancement, which is a $10,000 call it grant that they give you where you can use to pay for utilities or anything that the association needs to cover over this period. That does not have to be repaid. There was a bucket of up to $10 billion that was allocated for this program. And as of now, I think those funds were kind of running out as well. But the number one piece that I advise folks to do from the seminar is have conversations. You should be speaking to your accountant. You should be speaking to your attorney. You should be speaking to your lender or what options you may have out there. And do not think that you may not qualify. Go through the process of seeing if you can qualify, because just from our perspective, we just put 300 applications just this week and started funding some of these loans yesterday and today. So with that, I'll leave it to my next panelist.
Okay, Bill.
Okay, so I'll give some of the updates that are going on right now. As Marco points out, we had been prior to today covering these programs, and I'm seeing actually official notices from the lender saying, hey, we've got your application, but the funds are out. So that's where we are on this. To Marco's point, let's hope that Congress moves rather quickly and does this. Some of the unemployment numbers are staggering. So it would be in everyone's best interest if that gets going. So we assisted a lot of people trying to get these things through, but obviously you were in a log jam with the lender, and then the lender still had to go to the SBA anyway. So I don't know if people really understood that was the process, but it was a two-step process. So that's where it is on these loans. And the takeaway for associations now is to keep in mind that you likely have owners in your associations who either owned or worked at businesses that probably thought that this was going to be kind of a slam dunk stopgap measure, which now it is not. So there are some decisions that will be coming in the next couple of weeks, likely next week when you think about it, about layoffs and things like that, until there's confirmation that the next batch is going, and people are going to be a lot more gun shy as to whether or not the second round will cover it. So that's something that associations really need to pay attention to now, is that with that happening, the delinquencies probably are going to ring up. The court systems, Cook County, May 18th now, right?
Yeah, at the earliest.
At the earliest, May 18th. I have not seen anything from the other districts.
Kane, no, it's still the same order in Kane. Pretty much the same order everywhere else.
Yeah, I got one from, we do a little work in southern Wisconsin. I think the state did a shutdown through mid-May or something like that. Yes, so one thing's for sure that the court system will have to be part of that. But again, here in Illinois, DuPage, we'll see what happens. That said, regardless of we're talking of Cook or whatever, one thing we're getting is almost every other day. Yeah, the court date we gave you, that one's postponed. So the court dates is really what's going to impact us more than anything. And those keep getting kicked out. We are constantly rescheduling. Nonetheless, we're still at the same where we can still file new actions. And if you've got an action that's already going, you're kind of getting a little bit of stuff done, very little. But forcibles, because of the moratorium, there's nothing that can be done. You can go ahead and file, but nothing's going to happen. I did want to point out one thing, less of an association concern, maybe a concern if you are an association that's renting out a unit you got pursuant to an order of possession, and you took someone with federal housing assistance. The federal moratorium on evictions states you can't even start the notice process. So if you by chance are renting a unit and someone is a Section 8 tenant, we can't even they'd be 5-daying a tenant. We can't 5-day them. So there's nothing that can be done with that. And you know, usually when we're talking associations, it's a very, very, very small percentage of the universe. But that's kind of where we are on court process. Bob actually has a couple of updates as well on some things. Real estate, yes, real estate closings are occurring. Somehow some are being drive through. If it's cash, it's much easier, but the title companies are open. So if you are getting calls from attorneys and things like that, yes, they do want their paid assessments, the 22.1s and all that stuff. And I know our managers are probably working remotely, but you know, I just suggest do the best you can, the 22.1, try to keep the transactions going. I guess it's in everyone's best interest that things keep moving forward because you don't know what your seller's position is now. So yeah, you're still going to get that. Closings are still occurring. I think the recorder's office started opening some stuff up again.
Certain ones are open just for mail-in and such, but the Cook County wasn't doing anything.
The one thing we cannot do, obviously, because that part that has to be in person, is the declaration amendments, right? Because they need their 8 copies and things like that. So, so basic things like liens and stuff like that, that's fine. But if it's something that somehow had some aspect that was in person, that is not occurring right now. So I will throw it to Bob with the updates that he has.
I assume they made me go last because I talked the longest. It's okay. So a couple things. First of all, a very astute listener has informed me it's May 26th for Wisconsin. The shutdowns are the 26th. Thank you very much for that. So a couple of quick updates. Last Friday, it's funny that everything happens on Friday. We often do these on Friday. Governor Pritzker issued another executive order that affects some of our clients, not all of them, but some of them. It's Executive Order 2020-25. What that does is it suspends our ability to pursue post-judgment collections against people in the interim, as long as the stay-at-home order is in effect. So what effectively that means is we can't garnish people's wages until the stay-at-home order has been lifted. The question that's out there is does it apply to ones that are already in effect? The conservative answer would be is probably a judge is going to apply that if it were ever to come up before, but we can't even get in front of a court right now to make that determination. We did have some people who had accounts that were frozen, though, that we, because it just got served, that had to be unfrozen. So just be on the lookout that you won't be able to do any post-judgment remedies, at least moving forward, until a further order from Governor Pritzker. It sounds like the airwaves are saying that he's about to close school for the remainder of the school year today as well. We'll see if that comes through. His conference starts in a little bit. Please don't go there. Please stay here. Stay tuned. You can watch it later. The other things that have come out is somehow association law is still being made. Courts are still issuing opinions because at the state level, the appellate courts are still generally business as usual, maybe not having oral argument hearings, but they have a lot of papers that are filed with them in cases that they can decide, even with people not coming before them. So we're having some appellate court opinions come through, and we also, just last week, had a bankruptcy court opinion come through, an order come through out of the Northern District of Illinois that Bill and Gus Sparagus talked about in a video earlier this week, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of it. when someone declares bankruptcy, everything that's due prior to the date they declared bankruptcy is called pre-petition assessments. What that is it means if they get a discharge, means they go through the bankruptcy process properly, that amount they will not have to personally pay, provided they do everything correctly. Everything after that date, because we're in an association, is due as it comes due, and it's due against them personally. But there's also another component of common expenses that people pay. It's a lien on the property. So that pre-petition assessment, if they go through the bankruptcy process and complete it, they'll get a discharge personally, but the lien is still present. The lien is still obligated to be paid. The post-petition is both that personal obligation and a lien. So this bankruptcy order makes it clear that the bankruptcy court in the Northern District of Illinois feels it is not proper conduct to pursue an eviction action for pre-petition assessment. So as of that date, if somebody owed money, we cannot file an eviction action for it. Instead, what they want us to do is file liens and go through the foreclosure process if we're going to do that. Generally in the state of Illinois, we don't do foreclosures very often because the bank is often in a superior position to us, which means we won't collect out of the foreclosure sale often. So we don't often go that foreclosure route, and instead we try to do the eviction route. Since we can't do the eviction route here, what we're expecting to see most of is filing liens and waiting for properties to sell. And if they sell, then that lien would have to be paid at that point in order for that paid assessment letter to be cleared. But what's imperative is that we don't try to collect that personally. It's imperative that the paid assessment letter makes it clear that that person doesn't owe, the unit or the home owes that money. So managers, make sure you conform your conduct to that. And boards, make sure you're working with your attorneys to properly craft things when a bankruptcy might be involved. What we're seeing out there right now, we have a lot of people living and being stuck with each other all day, every day, basically. Since you can't go to the store very often and you're not supposed to, everybody's indoors. So especially in condos, everybody's absolutely driving everybody else crazy, is what we're seeing. We're having a lot of nuisance-related complaints come through. Nothing related to the COVID pandemic, but purely because people are now hearing each other all throughout the day, or hearing each other yell, hearing their kids play, since kids can't go to school. It has changed a lot of how people have to live together. And so a lot of the questions we are getting are of that nuisance variety of what do we do when we have one person complaining about noise and the other person who can't do anything to keep their kids from making noise because they're kids, or the cooking, we smell a stronger odor of cooking, or worse, smoke, that there's so much smoke going on from a unit that because someone's there all day now, they literally smell smoke all day. Those are the things that we have coming through from our clients, a lot of, other than, hey, this new thing has come up, do we have to report to the entire membership that we have a COVID case? The answer is you have to report to the membership that a COVID case is there. No, you don't have to report it. What generally people at a minimum will do is say the CDC guidelines and reiterate that we should be following the CDC guidelines of washing our hands and staying apart from each other to make sure that we are not going to be transmitting the virus back and forth. I think if you asked anybody here, really we're expecting that it is not going to be back to business as usual anytime soon with either President Trump's four-phase plan of reopening the country or Governor Pritzker's Midwest talks of the Midwestern states talking about when they will agree to reopen. What is clear is we don't meet any of those thresholds yet from what is being reported of what their talks are. So we're probably expecting some type of extension of the order. Obviously, we'll find that out probably a week from now or so. We'll probably hear from Governor Pritzker whether he will extend it or not, or at a minimum extend it for a large portion of it, but maybe rolling out smaller segments of the economy to allow that to be reopened.
Okay. All right, I think it's time now to go to some questions. So first question, and I'll just let you all answer if you feel appropriate or chime in if someone else started answering. First question this afternoon. Do SEPA reporting requirements for reserves require an explanation other than total fund value? So when I guess they're talking about the monthly or the annual report, should it be broken down, or is it just the amount that's in the reserves?
Generally, it's just the amount in reserves. I mean, we're not one that like to see the associations that break it out in all the different components. Once you start doing that and earmarking it for certain things, I think it's harder than when you need it for something else to try to get it out of that category and get it into just a general reserve.
Yeah, we agree 100%.
Yeah,
we don't like it to be we like it in one big bucket we can take from versus having to feel like we owe money from accounts to accounts.
Right.
I think the only reporting requirement is in the event of a sale. If funds are earmarked for something, you have to report what it's earmarked for. So if you're doing that practice, which we often don't see, we often see it all in one big pot nowadays. If you're doing the practice of having a roof reserve, a painting reserve, concrete reserve, you have to report what buckets all of that money is in.
And the banks also like to see the big bucket of reserves.
What was that, Marco?
I said the banks also like to see the big bucket of reserves, not. So that's a good point.
Okay.
I'm a lender. It's good.
Yeah, that is good.
Okay. So to piggyback on that, if the economic impact loan we're assuming, requires collateral, to apply for the loan, which usually is the pledge of future assessments. What happens if the association already has a loan in place? Will the SBA take second position to that, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to clarify, because we have associations in the whole spectrum in sizes, anything below 25,000 does not require collateral. Anything above that does. And the answer to that really is, let's say, and I'll give an example. Let's say that you have an existing loan that's 500,000, but you're requesting or requiring from the SBA for $1 million or what have you. You will, once the SBA approves you would refinance that debt that you have with the existing bank and then create that $1 million loan with the SBA. So as far as right now, that would not be subordinated to it. You would have to pay that loan off and have a mutual relationship with the bank as well on how that SBA loan is going to be treated, whether it be pari passu debt or would it be subordinated or not.
And Marco, if I can ask a follow-up question, I think Betsy, you said that question was in the light of some of these economic assistance loans, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so Marco, touch on, you and I have had these conversations kind of leading up to today, the SBA loans, the disaster assistance, and we may as well talk about the Paycheck Protection just because it's one of these new loans. The underwriting requirements for those loans were a bit relaxed from what I understood, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And so were the collateral requirements under those packages, were those relaxed?
You know, the actual metrics haven't come out in terms of what those relaxed guidelines are. And I think they're looking at every deal specifically. I mean, really the guidelines, when you talk about the payment protection program, you almost treat it like a grant. Right. So we're going to say, here's how many folks we have. Here's the multiple. We're going to use 75% of that loan for payroll costs and 25% of that to pay utilities, rent, mortgage, and interest. On the forgiving side of it, when you start forgiving, then you have to start putting through, checklist items to be able to get reimbursed, if you will. I think it's a really, really good question and something that we need to prepare ourselves for, because the payment protection program is short-lived. It's 8 weeks. But, our lives is going to continue beyond here in 2021 and 2022. So how can you prepare? Good record keeping is important. We were talking about reserves. We definitely should talk about what level of reserves should you have and how do you start building that? Start tracking some of the occupancy rate, the vacancy rates, any assessments that haven't been collected. Those types of things are important. But liquidity is going to be one of the biggest metrics that banks are going to continue to look at. I mean, it's just How much oxygen do you have to continue to operate in this environment?
And I think what's interesting now is, especially associations in an association context, they probably even had exposure to SBA loans, loan requirements, guidelines. The SBA, you know, for those of you who are just kind of hearing us talk about this stuff, really the SBA's role in normal times is more as of a guarantor. Lenders would normally do their normal underwriting and say, hey, look, this is a good loan, it's not a good loan. And where the SBA came in was, hey, we normally do this loan, but we have a collateral issue. You know, these people don't have homes that are free and clear, personal guarantee, and say in a startup business, not really a valuable thing to us. So the SBA was the guarantor of last resort to the lender. So what the SBA is saying to the lender is, go ahead and make that loan. If they don't pay, we will come in. This is a little bit different where they just said, hey, we're just pushing money through, and we've got, these 3 basic, lending requirements. Go ahead,
Right.
lender, don't worry about it. And the lender would not, in these programs, the lender's not going to even take a hit on these loans, and you even have to worry about the SBA guarantee, whereas in even normal times, that is something. It's definitely a different environment. Even though it's SBA, they've relaxed things. So, and to Marco's point, trying to find out what the final rules were, whatever, has been a real challenge. So,
And Marco,
That's
you
right.
mentioned that the SBA is going to require they be in the first position, correct?
Repeat that again.
Is the SBA is going to require that they're in the first position on a loan?
For that specific loan, yes, because the economic injury, economic injury loan is not forgiven, right?
Right.
The advances are forgiven. The payment protection plan is a forgivable debt, but the loan is not. So they're going to require to be in first position.
Yeah,
And I could go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. I was gonna say I know we represent some banks too that give loans, and if you go to try to take a loan out when you already have one, that would be an event of default in the event you did that. So just if it's not, even if the SBA wouldn't require you to refinance, you might need approval from your current bank in order to go.
That's correct. So there's a bucket, and you guys know this. There's a bucket of limitations and other debt that an association or a client could grab. But the number one thing that we should do is talk to your lender. You have to talk to your lender and say, hey, these are my needs for the next 3 months. I have, call it a $200,000 loan with you now, but I need 500. The SBA could give me another 300. How do we work this out? Can we do an intercreditor agreement? There's ways that you could back yourself into this, but you got to have the conversation.
Great.
Okay, so we've been talking about reserves, and this comes up a lot. We are a small 6-unit condo association. What amount of reserves do you recommend we have?
It's the $1 million question.
Isn't it?
Enough
that's
to
a
pay,
lot of reserves on $1 million.
enough to pay all the bills that come up with the common elements,
Yeah.
right? That's how much I mean, the general rule for underwriting, isn't it 10% at a minimum for a lot of the big banks, Marco?
Yep, 10%.
So that's not a hard and fast rule. That's the lending requirement. Obviously, if there's a reserve study, you would expect more, right, Karen?
Right, and a reserve study is your best tool. I mean, a 6-unit association might not go through and have a reserve study done, but they could still do their own due diligence on it. You have to get some estimates on what a roof costs, whatever some of the other common elements are, if you've got concrete work, asphalt, and just kind of project it out. The roof's due in 5 years and it's going to cost $100,000. How are we going to pay for that? So you could do your own little mini reserve study and kind of back into that.
I tell you, a good place to be is somewhere between, we see them 20 to obviously 40% is great, but we see them all in the spectrum. And the ones that are able to come back to the table and ask for capital are the ones that have continued to build up those reserves and maintain that disciplined approach, because, you don't know when you need it, but when you need it, you really need it. And that's the capital. And part of that assessment, or part of the credit underwriting process, is how much liquidity do we have? How much can we absorb if there's a downturn or if there's what have you? So maintaining at least a 20 to 30%, I could say you put yourself in a pretty good position.
Okay.
Okay, when you said 10% of what is the question? 10% of your operating budget for the reserve?
Annual budget, right?
Annual
Correct.
budget.
Yep.
Okay.
Which includes reserves. So if you have a budget of 100,000, they want 10,000 of that to be in reserves, 90,000 to operating. Or as Marco's saying, it would be good if you had 80,000 in operating and 20,000 going to reserves.
Okay.
Correct.
Hey, Marco, let me shoot a quick question. Do you think, if we look at 2008, 9, 10, do you think we're going to see any change up in the FHA requirements again? Because the 10% number we banty around, really, the origin, it's probably a number we've used before, but FHA kind of codified it when they started having their requirements. Have you heard anything about FHA saying, hey, we might have to relax things again to get loans quicker?
I did see some. I didn't get anything, conclusive on what was changing, but you almost have to start thinking that they have to change something, right? Because nothing will qualify for the next 6 months if we keep the same guidelines.
Right.
So I anticipate some of that, maybe to your point on the garnishment of wages, that those executive orders will trump some of that, but they would have to, I would think that they would have to relax some of that.
Okay.
Okay, here's one specifically for Karen. Are you proceeding with audits, and has there been a blanket extension of corporate tax filings?
We are proceeding with audits. I mean, obviously, we could only proceed with the ones that are more, have electronic records. The ones that are still, using more manual things, we're a little bit on hold right now. But there's plenty of electronic associations out there. Tax returns right now, the deadline's been extended to July 15th. We have personally extended most of our associations to get them through October 15th. Just the mere fact that July seems far away, but it's really not. And with the uncertainty right now, it's just that added protection of getting them through October.
Okay. And speaking of that, there was a question earlier that came in about when you have to file with the IRS, are you filing it calendar year or the fiscal year for the association?
And that all depends. An association, when they set up their governing documents, could be a fiscal year. We've seen some associations that have done that, but then they set it up differently with the IRS, unbeknownst to themselves, I think. So that usually runs into a problem when they go to file it as a fiscal year on, and the IRS kicks it back and says, no, you're filing it incorrectly. So it all depends. I can't answer that without knowing how they set it up originally when they set the paperwork up with the IRS.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna put two together here because they're pretty much similar. Is there a legal way to hold a board election online? And can we legally skip our annual meeting this year and then continue with the current board until the next annual meeting?
So the Condominium and Property Act has a provision on electronic elections, but it still has an in-person voting requirement that someone could submit a ballot in person or electronically, are the two options, and proxies being written out at that point. In a condo, you'd have to adopt your rules 120 days before your election. So, I'm hoping that we're able to have elections 120 days from now. That would mean that we'd be able to be around each other more. That would be better. If your election is in the next 4 months, you probably will not be able to rely on that as the sole purpose of being able to do your election. The Combination Community Association Act, it doesn't have that same 120-day requirement, but it also says that people need to be able to submit ballots in person at a meeting. So the question is, what would you do? Well, there's plenty of apps out there that would allow you to vote electronically. And the in-person requirement could probably be taken care of by having some type of ballot box set up there. So what you could probably do is have a location where people could drop off their ballots in advance of the meeting and then during the meeting, and then do a cutoff time for when those ballots would have to be accepted and then counted and tabulated along with the electronic results, cross-checked with the electronic results to make sure the same person didn't vote twice.
What, Chicago? That never happened.
Chicago-style politics sometimes. Want to avoid it. So you could technically do it that way. It's going to take some hard work by a property management company and a board to do that. So that turns us to the second question. Can they forego an annual election this year? And the legal answer is no. legally speaking, the declaration and the law says you shall have an annual meeting at which board members may be elected at. And I say may because sometimes in the SECA it may not be an election year, depending on how it's set up. But a condo, you have to have an annual election every year is what it says. And a term of 1/3 of the board has to expire every year. So the legal answer is no, you are technically not allowed to forego it. Do I understand that clients will end up doing that when they can't get together and they try multiple times? Absolutely.
I would point out too, I love going out on a limb on some of this stuff. A small association versus a big association. So the 120-day rule, what Bob and I are looking at is, even as attorneys, we look at a statute and there's the one thing we always look at is shall versus may. If it says shall, there's nothing really we can do about it. May gives us some leeway. You shall, the rule shall be adopted 120 days. But let's say in the instance of a 6, a 12, a 16, we say, hey, we want to have the election. No one wants to wait 120 days. Let's say we get written consent from each one of the owners, even though the statute says what it says. Anyone who could object, we say, hey, look, here's the deal. We're proposing this. It's supposed to be 120 days. It's statutory. Legally, we're not supposed to do this. But if you sign here, we'll go ahead and have that election. What do you think?
If you get unanimous consent, you can almost do anything. There's a lot of things. There's very few things you can't do. If you get everybody on board willing to sign something that says, I hereby agree to this, we call it estoppel. You've stopped yourself from being able to argue that you didn't like that process when you had specifically said we're going to use that process. So if you can get in a smaller association, you can do that. When you have a 1,000-unit association, obviously getting a consent from everybody's going to be hard. But you also got to remember, consent is also from people who aren't there, like a bank. If a property is vacant and foreclosed on, the bank is the owner of that. You would need their consent, in theory, to get an election approved and rules in place to be able to do that election.
And banks are so responsive when we send out letters to them, aren't they?
Close your ears, Marco.
Banker on letter. No, except for your bank, you're very responsive. So I mean, that's the thing. Like I say, in a small one, and there's the second part of it is, and I won't push this as much as we have in some of the other webinars. We're using a lot of this. Act now, ask forgiveness later. If we had 95% where people consented to, and you got a couple of five outliers that said, hey, they never should have the election. I'm not sure where judges are going to be on the, hey, look, it wouldn't have changed the result type of analysis and all that. We'll see what comes of it. But like I say, in the smaller setting, we have unanimous, like Bob said, unanimous pretty much cures all. Yeah. Because you all were asked and you all said okay. So no matter what the statute said, I just don't know where you'd go with it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. In terms of assessments, I have a couple of questions that are similar again. Some boards are revising their budget, obviously. For example, because of the pool, they know that's not going to open, so the amount that they were collecting for that, they obviously don't need that. So that's part of it, but then I have a different, similar but different. A 10-unit condo, they want to know your opinion on what if they reduce the monthly assessment so that they can, show compassion, provide some relief to owners, but they don't want to, make it something that's permanent. They want to do it as a temporary measure. And would it be wise to offer a percentage or even the entire monthly amount? I guess skip one.
Mhm.
What do you think?
I don't like it on any front. Here's the deal. You can't waive assessments. If you were actually going to reduce the assessments, it would require an amended budget. My thing is this, you stay the course, and certainly some people will say, I'm capable of making a payment, a partial payment. That's a payment plan. The obligation isn't gone anyway. So I would, again, we have to remember the reason we set budgets is because we have to pay, for in a building for the common electric, the common water, the snow removal, the facade that's about to fall off. Those things aren't getting apportioned to us. And so there's nothing we can do with our obligations. So we have to be careful of that. So literally, and particularly someone saying a percentage, we're going to reduce the assessment by 15%. I would be dead set against something like that. Again, my opinion, and I'll let you chime in afterwards, I would say you have to stay the course and deal with on a case-by-case basis, but try to get as much as you can. You still need that money.
I don't mind someone reducing the assessment as long as they have a paper trail. I want to see a paper trail that says why we're doing it and what it's being done versus all of a sudden a board letter going out saying, hey, the assessments are 25% cheaper. You just
Here's a
want, I want
coupon.
to see, I want to see a paper trail. And the only negative I see with it is, we adopted a budget based off of our expectations, and we said we were going to need all of that money, and now we're saying we're not. You are allowed, especially in a condo, it's specifically stated, you're allowed to factor into a budget the owner's ability to pay. It's one of the factors you should use in determining what budgeted assessments you want. That's why it doesn't make sense to have a $100,000 special assessment for a $50,000 condo. It's worth $50,000. It makes no sense to make them pay $100,000. So, you're allowed to factor that in. I would think that's the same for the non-condos as well. I just want to see a paper trail. So that way, when someone comes and questions me, a year from now or 5 years from now, why we decreased the budget, we want to have a good paper trail showing why we did.
Hey, I have a question for Karen, kind of
Yes.
budgets. So at the end of the year, you make a determination of how much money you throw over to reserves and all that. And once that occurs and an association wants to mix up what it's doing with its reserves, is there anything they'll need to do with the IRS as far as saying, hey, we're going to amend a return or anything like that if they're going to use reserves for operating?
Not necessarily. It comes into play more if they file the Form 1120, which is the same form big businesses file. Most associations file an 1120H, and that does not come into play. So not really from the tax standpoint.
Okay. So there's no tax implications that necessarily, unless they're, like you're saying, they're filing a straight 1120, that they have to necessarily worry about.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, speaking of special assessment, due to some owners' incomes as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, we are postponing the bulk of a special assessment funded project until next year. We may want to address some of the issues. So how could we structure a deferred payment plan for people who have lost income? Our governing docs state that we can start collection proceedings after 60 days in default. If asked to allow more time by the homeowner, would we be obligated to charge the amount of interest earned from our reserve fund beyond 60 days? Not sure I understand it.
I don't understand the end of it, to charging someone
Yeah.
interest for the reserve fund. I mean, that's the association's interest. I guess if you're saying if you lost the interest,
Lost the interest.
I
maybe?
mean, I guess you could try to make that your late fee. The interest is going to be pennies, though, right? Compared to what a late fee is. Your interest on $100. What are rates right now, Marco? What are interest rates right now?
They're paying you to take that.
2%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you look at a month at that rate on $100, you're talking about 30 cents probably.
And not only that, late
Oh, you're talking about deposit rates. Yeah, they're like
Mhm.
5 basis points.
5 basis points. So we're talking about 0.05%.
the sucker's
you're
worth more in the
basically-
lobby.
Right. Yeah. The paper you send the thing on about what they have to pay is going to actually be more than the interest they lost. So what I would say is you would want to plan. So if your documents say you can start collections within 60 days, that means you have the option to do it. If it says you shall do it, and by the way, I've never seen a shall institute collections at 60 days, Mark. I need a declaration. If it says that, then you have the option of doing collections. What you probably should do, since you have someone interested, perhaps, is some type of payment plan. You could set up that plan on something is reasonable to the association, and as long as you make a business decision about how it's going to be paid and it being fair, that should be acceptable. Especially in a time when we're right now, where I think we're approaching nearly 20% unemployment, at least in the short term. That is something that we'd want to see, and I assume a court would want to see, and wouldn't penalize us as an association for trying to work with people to pay the bill eventually.
And then to that point, keep in mind the one area that the association has leeway is late fees. And if there's anything we ever get into a tangle with judges when they're trying to be compassionate, even during good times, it's late fees.
Yeah.
So, that's the one where you can say, hey, look, we're not going to the extent your declaration is written a certain way or your fine schedule, that's the one area where you have discretion. So keep
Just
that.
to add, the SBA, and I'm not too proficient on this, but the SBA does have a unit owner fact sheet for disaster assistance. And in one of the sections, it does cover assessments. So if the unit owner applies, It says unit owners may borrow funds to cover a one-time assessment by the association, depending on what the repair is. So I could send that to the group after we're done.
That's interesting. And if you have something like that, we can put that up for people to download. Because we had talked about this before. There are some HO6 policies.
Some insurance policies.
There's some insurance policies. Now, it's more the way I would understand it in terms of a disaster. Tornado hits, wipes out big area of a common interest. They have to special assess or whatever. For some reason, there's a special assessment that's not covered enough by the insurance of the association. Some HO6 policies for the unit owners have a provision that'll say, we'll cover that. So I wonder, with the term disaster, which is what we're going through, will there be people trying on their HO6, if they have that coverage, to submit it? Because I did see an article on the Tribune, I haven't get a chance to read it yet, where business owners under business loss interruption are starting to submit and insurers are denying.
Right.
So that'll be the next frontier that we're talking about probably as that story develops.
Yeah, have your owners talk to their insurance companies.
Yes.
Okay, we have an anonymous question here. When the pandemic started, there seemed to be a lot of responsibilities that the board had to undertake. I'm not sure I remember, that they had to. I know there were suggestions. At this point, I don't seem to understand the responsibilities. Our board just posted, we're not having our board meeting, and read the cdc.gov recommendations. But since then, residents have said, well, we could meet somewhere else, or we could do it some different way. So there are some residents that want the board to require masks being worn in the halls and the elevator, but the board doesn't want to take that recommendation. So right now, what, if any, responsibility does the board have in those things?
There's nothing that's been legally mandated to a board for sure, or anyone who's even in the property management end of it, that they do anything. There's nothing mandated that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think the CDC is just guidelines, right? There's no order that says thou shalt wear a mask when you're outdoors. So it's just a guideline of what they say they want people to do or recommend that people do. So I don't think, the board has to force people to wear masks in the common elements. I don't think the board has to meet under these current conditions. They wouldn't have to meet, whether it's by Zoom like this or GoToMeeting or whatever it's doing. It doesn't have to meet in those time periods. Even if their declaration and bylaws say thou shalt meet on April 17th of every year as one of your board meetings, you are not going to have to do that in this time period because you cannot physically get together. So what I would say is where you need to have those meetings. You have to have 4 a year. You're going to need to have those meetings eventually. But there's no requirement that we do things that are not required by law. Is it a good idea? That's up there. That's a political decision for people to make amongst themselves. I'd be worried if my homeowners association said I had to wear a mask when I'm outside of my house. But in a condo, maybe it does make sense to some people, but that's a board decision. And, good luck enforcing it against some people when you tell them they have to wear a mask.
Let me mess with Bob for a second.
Oh, gosh.
So 20% of those entitled to vote can call for a meeting for any purpose, correct?
Special meeting, yes.
Special meeting for any purpose.
Any purpose allowed for members that they could do.
For members that they could normally do
Yeah.
under the declaration. So in this instance where they're saying we're not having the board meeting, can we take our 20% and say, hey, look, we think there's technological means to have this meeting. We're asking that at least a meeting be called for that purpose, and we want to do it technologically. What do you think?
Could they force a board meeting?
During these times, yeah.
To not have a board meeting, I just don't have to show up. Like, in order to have a board meeting, it takes a quorum of the board. If the board doesn't feel safe, that's like saying I have to have a meeting in the middle of a riot, and someone could storm there, and that's our usual meeting place. No, if I don't feel safe, I don't show up. And so the membership, it's hard to force a board to meet, physically, but could they call a membership meeting? Sure. Get 20% of them together, that would be a membership meeting.
And they could do it online on their own.
Sure. They could call it. They could call a meeting. I mean, the question is, do they have to have an in-person component? I think that's probably where it does. It doesn't physically say that if they're not taking votes, ballots for an election on that day. So, I mean, sure, they could call a meeting of the members, but it's hard to force a board to come to a meeting to do something. Obviously, that might tell you what your board believes in you if they don't think it's important enough to go, and maybe you should vote them out of office. But that requires you to get enough people to vote them out of office.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so in keeping with the board meetings, is the board required by law to approve a contract for service at an open board meeting? Must the approval include the vendor, amount of payment, service to be recorded in the minutes? And with the current virus restrictions, how would the board meet legal requirements for contract approvals?
Well, there's a component of this. Karen, can you talk about when you see the minutes of an association? What do you want to see in those minutes when related to contracts?
We want to see the amount, the approval of it.
So when you guys are doing an audit, if you don't see that, it raises red flags for you, correct?
Oh, it's questioned, yeah.
Yeah, an association should not sign a contract for time and materials if that's where this is going.
No. So the answer is, in my opinion, is yes, you approve contracts in an open meeting unless there's an exception to that. The only exception I'm aware of is in the event there's an emergency and you have to get someone out there, or if we're doing informal consent by a unanimous board. That's from the Not-for-Profit Act. So if we have unanimous consent, which means we've signed a resolution that says we're going to do something, then that would stand in the place for minutes. And then probably Karen would still ask the question, but she would at least have a document that has a number on it, has the contract on it, and shows it's been approved, which allows her to check her boxes of whether or not this is a proper expenditure. But legally in the minutes, does it say you have to have the amount of the contract in it? No. What it says is we shall keep accurate minutes. And it doesn't say what that amount is. But generally speaking, we throw the amount on the minutes for the rare reason of Karen needs it if she's going to be doing it, and it's easier.
Well, it's transparency too.
Exactly.
Yeah, at the same time, there's no way we shouldn't be telling our
Yeah.
membership what we're paying and who we're paying it to.
Right.
You know?
And they'd be entitled to the contract. So even if they only saw the minutes,
Right.
they only requested the minutes, they would then be entitled to the contract to look at the contract. So why not just put it in there? What do you have to lose?
Okay, can I ask, I would like to ask a question, Bob, to clarify for myself. You said the contract may be approved without an open meeting if there's a resolution in place that the board agreed to it by unanimous resolution. Is that correct?
Unanimous written consent is out of the Not-for-Profit Act. Has not been tested as far as I know against an association. It's the one thing that was missing from Palm, that Palm didn't address, is whether or not unanimous consent was allowable. But what it requires is every board member affirmatively state that they agree to it. They have to sign their name to it, essentially, that they agree to it. Not, hey, Bob voted yes, Mark Cervantes voted yes, and Bill Chat didn't say anything. Then that's not unanimous written consent. That's 2 out of 3. We have to hold a meeting in order to do said act.
And then just dovetailing on the example you said a few minutes ago, the water main breaks, there's water coming out like Buckingham Fountain, Roto-Rooter's there on a Saturday. The president does not have to call a meeting, debate it, and then say, hey, should we sign this? He can go ahead and say, fine, just get it done. Then within
Then do the
7,
notification
Right.
of the membership.
that's the emergency he's talking about, where that wouldn't have necessarily happened in an open meeting. But again, that's going to come out to the membership that this happened, and we have to follow the procedure to go ahead and ratify the act.
Okay. In the 2019 year-end report from the property manager, it only showed expenses paid by line. In the past years and in the year-end report, there were budget line items, actual expenses, plus or minuses. This report also showed 2 items that were not in the budget, and they were classified as miscellaneous, and they were sizable amounts. Is this normal, or should this be questioned by the homeowners?
Karen, what do you think?
Yeah, what do you think
Is
about
it
that one, Karen?
normal?
I'm not a fan of miscellaneous.
Neither are
Transparency.
banks.
Transparency is key. I mean, I would rather it list exactly what it is. To me, a large miscellaneous item, puts a red flag up, and that's definitely something that's looked at. I mean, you do, this is, especially now, you want by line item, you want your budget. It's all going to be management tools that you're going to need to be looking at on an ongoing basis. And something I forgot to mention before too, especially in these times, you have to also keep track of what bills you haven't paid. Because you could be looking at your financial statement saying, hey, we're in great shape, but then maybe there's 60 grand of bills because your cash balance is low that you haven't paid yet. So you got to also know what you're looking at on a monthly basis. When you're looking at your financial statement, or is it cash basis? Is it accrual basis? Is it modified? Is it a hybrid of that? Just so you know, okay, if it's a modified accrual, you know, your assessments are on the accrual basis, but your expenses are on the cash basis, which could mislead a financial as well, without knowing if there's like additional accounts payable out there. So it might look like, you know, what we're doing great, but nobody's talking about the 60 grand of payables that we haven't been able to pay yet.
Well, if a financial, end of the year financial had an extra line item that's not on the budget, is it acceptable to add it as a miscellaneous expense? So at least it's accounted for, right?
Well, yeah, you definitely need to account for it, but I would prefer it be clear to what it is. Is it concrete? Is it like, what is that miscellaneous? It's something more than.
Yeah, a footnote explaining what the uptick was would cover something like, there's something, right? I
Right.
Explain it.
Right.
Okay, we're gonna get a little less technical for a moment here. Our condo association used to update residents every year with a list of owners, addresses, and phone numbers. Is this okay?
They used to update it every year with owners' names,
Addresses and phone
addresses,
numbers.
and phone numbers. Wow. I don't know any association that does it anymore. They sometimes have a book, but it's an opt-in, policy. The act in Chicago doesn't want you giving up anybody's information absent some explanation of whether or not it's commercial purposes or not. And so most associations are not going to do that. I recommend they do not publish people's names, addresses, and phone numbers. It is a public record of who owns property. People can go find that out, or they can ask an owner list, make a formal written request for it, so we can track who we've given it to, versus broadcasting that Bob Prince, who, could be, or let's make it Joe Homeowner or whatever, so it's not me, well, I might be, that person might be, hiding from a spouse who beats them. You have no idea. And if you're broadcasting, making things more likely to be found, it could cause trouble. And most of my clients don't want any involvement with that.
Yeah, and not to mention the people that pay for blind trust don't exactly want the information coming up from behind the blind trust that way. But they still have the right. The association still has the right to collect the information in the census.
Yes.
The publication is a separate.
Please
issue.
collect it.
Yeah,
collect it.
please, managers, do the censuses. Censuses. Yeah. Censi.
I don't know.
Censi.
Just to clarify, because we are getting a couple of comments here. If the homeowners choose to do this as a voluntary directory, there's no problem with that.
Never a problem. If someone, like I said, if someone consents to something, it's hard to argue you shouldn't have done something with it.
Okay.
If they consent to distribution, that's fine.
Okay. All right.
But let me interrupt you just 1 second. Just a kind of a side note on that. Just so you know, if it hasn't happened to you already, there's a lot of fraud going around. I already had 3 fake real estate transactions in my emails today asking me to open up to look at the closing figures. The reason I knew they were fake is there was 3 email addresses before, and it was like no property address. So just so you know, like in terms of publishing information in this day and age, it's just there's plenty of argument against it. Just my 2 cents.
That's a very good point. And from our side, think about it. Banks were processing applications at the hundreds and hundreds, and people started getting really relaxed trying to get the funds, and people just started sending information. And, obviously the phishing started coming. We have a report that, fraud, increased almost by 150% just in the last.
Right. And I'm sure you're aware in terms of closings, we will not email anything anymore. I will not even use a PDF document with a password. If you want a routing and an account number, you're gonna have to phone us, or some people are going back to fax. It's just to Marco's point. Do you know how much financial information in PDF form was probably exchanged. And Bob and I are armchair geeks, and I'll tell you whether or not someone's even in your system or not, you may not know. You know,
That goes on a regular basis. You should always have a process of when you're sending a wire out or an ACH out or making a payment to verify by person, or a second person should be able to verify that that wire should be going to that specific person.
yeah.
Wow. Okay, if we have a Zoom meeting, do we have to allow owner questions, or can we do the meeting with the owners muted?
So Bob can answer that because we'll answer a condo and Sika.
Yeah, so if you're a Sika association, it says thou shall provide a homeowner comment period as part of your board meetings, which means you have to provide the owners with the ability to at least post their comments to the board. Whether you answer them might be something different. It's just a homeowner comment period. Condos and master associations, there's no like provision that does it. It's just the historical thing you do. I was part of a meeting a couple weeks ago where there was no homeowner comment period because it was a condo meeting.
Yeah, I'm having mixed results on my Zoom meetings. I'm having some that are, I've had some where I thought, oh, this one's going to be not good, and it actually went very well.
Yeah.
And I had ones where I thought, oh, this will be a 40-minute thing, and next thing you know, I'm ordering dinner. So, Zoom obviously has the capacity to mute people and all that. Yeah, that's that.
Okay, specifically for Karen, does an HOA have to file taxes each year?
Absolutely.
So, wait, so do we have to file taxes too?
No. Yes. Every association does, right? Because it's an entity.
Yes, every association does. You have a federal ID number. I mean, you've got to file a tax return.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to piggyback on that, when you're going into a bank for getting approvals and requesting additional capital, the banks look at the quality of the financial statement and the reporting of it, right? So they'll look 3 to 5 years sometimes and say, well, why weren't these filed? And that goes back to record keeping and the ability for you to have access to capital as you go forward. So it's very, very important that you do file from at least the bank's perspective and from your own perspective as well.
Yeah.
And if you have not filed yet, you have until July 15th.
Unless you get an extension, right?
Yeah, it kind of goes to the
Right.
advantage a lot of business clients would say, I've got 2 sets of books, one for the bank and one for the IRS. It doesn't work anymore. I mean, the banks want to go, what did you file with the IRS? So, yeah.
So I'm sorry, Karen, did you say you do need to file for an extension, or can you just wait till July 15th if you didn't make it?
You have until July 15th, and then if you want an extension to October, you could file it then.
Oh,
Hey, Karen, real quick on the extension. Corporations, Cs and S's, they were always a month ahead of time, which was March 15th. That postponed.
That didn't change.
Didn't change that, right? Yeah.
No, because they were due before any of this anyways.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
okay, we're winding down here. Can you repeat, I don't remember who said it, but can you repeat if condo association is eligible for the PPP loan? We recently got a political action call to email our representatives to request that condos be included in the PPP program. So,
Yeah, go ahead. I think I mentioned that. So the PPP is strictly for payroll. The original guidance that we got at the beginning of this program, and obviously this has changed a lot, was that any non-for-profit could apply, so long as you have payroll. Okay, so we're going to go based on that guideline, and we said we could. Then there are other changes that came through that said, all right, you have to exclude contractors. Well, the question then starts becoming, do you have payroll or not? Because that's the point. And if you don't have any payroll and you have contractors that you pay, they do not qualify because the contractor itself or themselves are able to qualify for the PPP. So for the benefit of this meeting today, my conversation is more to the economic injury disaster loan program, the longer term view versus the PPP.
Yeah, I think there's a residential property exception to the PPP program. It talks about something about whether you provide healthcare related services or benefits. What I would do is I would work closely with your banker to determine whether or not you're eligible. From my understanding, a lot of them would not be eligible for the PPP because they don't provide some type of service on the healthcare related stuff.
I think the closest you're going to get is a high rise downtown that if it has their station engineers as employees of
Correct.
the association, then you're talking a genuine employee. Not, you know, the fact you have people there who are contracted with you, to Marco's point, doesn't make them an employee. There are legal requirements to make someone an employee.
Talk to your bank officer.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, here's a question I'm not sure is within our realm. What are the guidelines for reopening the health club?
Reopening a health club in an association?
Apparently, it doesn't say, but I'm
Um,
guessing.
I would assume so.
I would follow the CDC guidelines is the starting point. So the problem is all gyms are closed, right? I think it's actually gyms were in phase 3 of I think President Trump's program is phase analysis yesterday. I think I saw they were in either 3 or 4, which means they're one of the last things to reopen, in large part because you have people sweating and touching things that obviously other people will sweat and touch. So it's probably a melting pot for disease to be transmitted amongst places. There's a reason why you see wrestlers with ringworm and such is because the other guys had it on the mat and they touched the mat. So, I expect you're not going to want to, if you've closed your health club, which I imagine most people have, you're going to probably take caution in reopening that unless you have some really good sanitization processes in the interim.
Okay.
And
All
I
right.
think that's something else to take into consideration too. I mean, as you're looking at your expenses and your budgets too, I mean, you could have cleaning costs that are going to increase this year that you're not even thinking about. Especially in
for a
more
health club.
condominium buildings, you're having to clean more and disinfect more. So those are additional expenses you weren't anticipating before.
Yeah.
Okay. Can the board restrict homeowners from continuing construction projects in order to limit the number of people entering a building?
So we talked about this a few weeks ago, and I think we kind of put it into necessary versus I want. A necessary construction project where I need water, plumbing to go through so I can actually use my unit, you probably, no matter what, have to let happen. If someone wants to, expand their deck, to add it, make it a fenced-in thing or a screened-in porch, you probably do not have to. That's probably not as necessary. But I think it's going to be a hard argument for a board to sell someone who needs some necessary thing to be done in order to be able to be habitable under code. That is probably something we'd have to let happen. Could a board restrict it otherwise? Yeah, I think they probably could say because of the order, you should not be having people here. But you got to remember, those contractors are necessary people, right? Basically,
Yeah,
any contractor is a necessary employee or an essential employee, necessary business, which means they are allowed to operate. And you might have some restriction that they, as outsiders coming into the association, might have to wear masks. I know businesses are doing that right now, but that's someone outside coming in versus being in there and living there and having to be there all the time.
So what if they have a contract though? What if I signed a contract to have some work done and we only got halfway through by March 17th? May I finish that? And what do I do about the contract?
Well, again, I guess it depends. It would depend if we're in an association who is trying to restrict construction projects. If it's already torn up and they have to put it back together, that's no longer, hey, I want to do something. It's probably necessary.
Okay.
You have to be able to close out your permits, for one. And two, you probably can't live with an open, bathroom. You're not supposed to have that. If they demoed an entire kitchen, they probably need a kitchen in their unit because they can't go out to eat anymore. They have to have food brought in. So you'd have to let them do that if they started the project. But does someone, go in, you allow them to remodel their kitchen and remove walls to do that? Right now is not the time to do that. Now is probably the time where you say, no, we need you to put your project off because you're going to make structural changes and we can't bring an engineer in to look at it to make sure you're not causing a problem.
Not to mention you're not going to get inspections done either.
Yeah, I mean, when's an inspector going to come to approve it?
Yeah.
Most municipalities are closed and they're not going into units to inspect things. At most, they're doing it by a video, which I'm sure the inspectors love.
Yeah.
Okay. I have one here. You were talking, I think it was Bob, you mentioned about the courts that were closed, or Bill. One of our unit owners is a criminal defense attorney. we think he's still going to court and getting exposed to the virus. Are those courts open now? And if so, which ones?
Some criminal proceedings, juvenile proceedings are open because people have, Fourth, Fifth Amendment rights. I'm no criminal expert. I pretty much jettisoned my criminal law after I took the bar exam. But there are criminal defendants who still need representation in certain proceedings. A lot of them are being done by video if they can. But unfortunately, you can't stop people from coming, people who live in your association from exiting and coming back. You have to do that. You can't prohibit him from going and leaving the association and coming back. A lawyer, for whatever reason, we are deemed necessary people, where our job is a necessary component somehow. I know why, because we provide a vital service to people and we're important.
We are important.
Yeah, we're not. But you have to allow that person to perform their functions. You can't tell a contractor right now he can't leave to go do jobs because he has the right to work. And in fact, we need them to do certain things because that's the only thing keeping the economy from completely collapsing right now.
And arguably, a criminal guy is going to get more deference in the court system anyway, because there have been some tacit discussions about the constitutionality of these shutdowns and things like that. So people's criminal rights for sure, and emergency basis stuff too. So right. Even us, if we have something emergency based, though they're trying to set this up with a little bit with video conferencing, but just so you understand, there's nothing more antiquated than the legal system when it comes to technology. We still have to show judges green cards from certified mailings, even though I can say, hey, the guy responded via email, go pound sand. Could you put that in writing, Mr. Chat? Well, here it is, Your Honor. So the video thing, as much as I welcome it, we'll have to wait and see how that all works out.
Can't wait for that to be put on broadcast so all the judges say we told them they're antiquated.
Now, the judges, it's not the judges, it's the system. Some judges are very forward thinking. So,
okay, I think we kind of addressed this earlier, but we just got a new question. I live in a high rise and a resident self-identified to a staff member that he had had COVID in the last 3 weeks. What is the board's duty to notify the homeowners?
So yeah, we talked about this earlier. I don't think there's any well, first of all, I would not say, Bob Prince has COVID. I don't think that's ever appropriate to out a certain individual as having it. At the very largest you should say is that, there's a confirmed case in the association, and we recommend that you adhere to the CDC guidelines. And here are the steps we're doing to try to help protect you, i.e. we are now sanitizing this even more than we were doing because we were already doing it more before. So now we're 4 times sanitizing it per day versus 1 time per day or 1 time per week. So that would be the most extreme I would recommend that somebody do. What a lot of our clients are doing is just saying, hey, now is the time to protect yourself. CDC guidelines say you should be doing this, hand washing. I will refer you to the link. Anybody around you could have it, so just protect yourself.
What about the floor that I lives on?
It's the same concept to me. I think it's the same thing if I wouldn't want to out a resident saying, hey, it's the guy on the second floor because I'm the one who got brought in an ambulance. It's me.
But we've got a high rise and we've got 10 units. Can you say 22nd floor, we got one?
Yep. So we had a couple clients, HOA clients that had, and the notification came just like you mentioned, Bob, and they just said, we found on the 8th floor someone to have, and these are the precautions that we took. But it was a general broad, just to make sure that 1, we're following the guidelines. 2, we're doing extra work to clean up the place so that everybody is protected. But they did mention the floor.
The floor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you can nip that close.
Okay, so maybe that's my extreme,
right,
is saying the floor. And then, because if you take me the unit number, I'm going to tell you don't do it. Yeah. So it's unit 22. That's a bad idea.
But it was also a big building too, so.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. If you take some of the downtown buildings, a floor could have a lot of units, and who it could be is a larger universe than if it was a 3-flat. Second floor, it's like, I'm the guy who owns the second floor, then we know who it is, so.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think we're going to end our webinar for this afternoon. I would like to thank Bob, Bill, Karen, and Marco, and also all of the participants who, I was going to say members, but participants who have joined us this afternoon. And We welcome your input. You can reach ACTA at acta.org. We have a phone line there, and we can also accept emails. And I think the information for our panelists was available on the flyer, so how to contact them in the future. So once again, thank you very much, and stay safe out there.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you.
Thank you.